I have to say, this has to be the angle when we start on the LCS with Team Liquid, because Team Liquid has had this story. I pointed out after the LCS, it wasn't just LCS. Like, look, obviously on paper, they were supposed to win that finals and then come in big form. But actually, they've done this at all the tournaments, like MSI and EWC, both times. It's like, we almost beat T1. It's like, yeah, but almost. You know, yeah, you're right. Spiritually, you sort of were about to win morally, but you didn't. So here's the question I have for you is, do you actually still ride the TL train? Are we supposed to get hyped? Are we supposed to believe, for example, they're going to be a top 8, or they could? I mean, it's a best of 3 in the Swiss. Can they upset like an Asian team or something? What are your expectations for TL?
Yeah, I mean, I think my baseline, like for the tournament, is I think the expectation should be that one Western team like makes it to quarters. I feel like that's reasonable with the strength of the 3 teams.
Also say as well, I mean, I saw someone run the numbers on Reddit, but it's also true that another reason why there should always be a chance for at least one is because you can also get like the NRG one last year. Yeah, there's nearly always one team, if you run the numbers, basically gets one insane. One team gets a really, really bad one, and one team gets an insanely good one. So maybe if they get the path where you get Fnatic, and you know what I mean, like 4 or 5 teams where you only have to play maybe one Asian team is doable. But I mean, in general, though, I actually think surely TL's in the convo with G2. Yeah. For they could do that even without the lock, right? Surely they could actually maybe win these teams in a best of 3.
No, I think that like TL showed, at least in facing T1, that they can play map in a way that does match some of the best teams. And I think that for me, the interesting part about TL coming into this tournament is I feel like a lot of the edge that TL did have was they were good at playing the swaps and also swapping around second grubs really early on. Now, swaps are still going to exist, but I think a lot of the teams have really caught up in that meta. So, like, if I'm on the TL, Hopium now, it's actually that I feel like the meta swap should really help Umti and his, like, wheelhouse of champs. Like, this last split, for me, with all the AP junglers being meta, TL really ignored them for the vast majority of the split, which I found was really interesting because, A, they're almost playing a counter meta in LCS by really heavily prioritizing early in the split the Sejuani and the Malakais when everyone was playing the Zyras and eventually the brands that were big in the meta. But that did really help TL play this fast style where they could go for the early dives, early swaps, and then blow you out of the water like in the first 10 minutes. So they had a good map. So I feel like now most teams should be playing that meta with how big champs I expect like J4 to be. But that should really fit Umti, who like that is his wheelhouse, right? He wants to play shit that's fast and get things going.
Like Lee Sin and Jarvan, should be very helpful. I agree with that. Look, man, I'm concerned though, because like if you think about the mid champion pool, we're definitely drifting away because Ziggs nerfs are pretty substantial, I would say, to the way that pro teams like to fast push with Ziggs. I still think probably APA plays Ziggs at this event just because he is a specialist, and like I don't think it's completely useless right now. But I mean, I'm concerned because Talia, who is kind of a fringe meta pick across regions throughout playoffs, I don't know how much we're going to see that, coming in. So what is I mean, AP has been kind of good at Ari at times, I would say. So maybe that's something that he can revert to.
Yeah.
But I would say even in the playoffs, right, his individual performance in the finals versus FlyQuest wasn't super inspiring. And the swaps were a massive part of their identity. They were exploiting the fact that T1 was kind of bad at swaps and TL was good at swaps. And like they figured out a way to be world-class macro through things that they could control, which was studying swaps and being able to outplay Asian teams on that. And I just don't know if that's going to be the same type of situation that we are going to deal with when it comes to international play. So maybe the wind is kind of out of Team Liquid sails in some areas.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on that. Like, I feel like a lot of teams have caught up. I mean, I was like sitting on my high horse, like out here, like wild, like, putting your bot lane into mid early before second grubs, like that makes so much sense. Just gives you the ability to play each side instead of playing top. I think that one of the ways that TL was really good at getting APA ahead is that they just send him bot when grubs spawn too. So like, hey, you have a TP, you can still play it. But I thought they were really also really good at abusing like melee champions being in mid, like playing into a Yone. They would overload that lane and just deny that character resources, funnel APA. Then all of a sudden, your Corki's up a level or 2 on Yone. He can't really do anything in the mid game. I think that is what I expect TL to run. Yone is a champ that I think a lot of people expect to be high presence. He seems really strong in this patch. TL for me is the team that I think they're going to let a champ like that through and try and emulate that strategy in this tournament. But I am kind of with you, and I feel like some of the magic, like a lot of people were like, wow, TL's really good at swaps. And then people actually started looking at TL VODs, figured out how to swap like them. And I think some of their edge coming into this tournament is actually gone. So I do agree with you, but I still feel like the baseline of this team is like, if they get leads, they can convert them into wins. It's just how many leads can they convert. And I agree with you on APA's champion pool too. I've been covering APA since he was playing like amateur in 2020. I started casting post-COVID. And he had to pick up a lot of champions in his time because he was a Acel, Talia, Kled player in solo queue. Orianna was one of the first champions that he picked up. I think he'll be okay on Orianna, but like there are just so many sick Oriannas in this tournament because I mean, obviously just being a staple champion of mid. I wouldn't rank APA as like an insane Ori or an insane Syndra. These are champions that he did pick up earlier on, but I feel like he actually did legit have edge on marksman because he's always been a Tristana player. And that really transitioned well to some of the other champs that he was able to pick up because he was quite good at the Corki Tristana. So I'm wondering what happens with TL and with that pool. I could definitely see them still trying to force some of those champions in, if that's possible. But I'm curious what they end up playing in this tournament because I feel like as much as a meta buff as it is for Umti, I don't know how APA is going to respond to that.
And Yun, I mean, Yun is a player, like, I think the big story of this year was like, oh, APA and Yun, they went to the boot camp at MSI and they got so much better. And like, they did legitimately have good international performances. But honestly, like, I think we can say Masu outplayed Yun in the playoffs. And like, is there a concern for you about Yun's current form? Because that really hasn't been up to the same level that we've come to experience.
Don't you think, Monty, that the meta has sort of like abandoned him though? Like he was really good on certain champions, and then as some of those have gone out, it seems like his level dipped a bit.
Well, I think like he has been good on the Ezreal, but a lot of his fallback champions have been champions like Varus, right? And it seems like sometimes they try and shoehorn the Varus in where it, you know, maybe it shouldn't be. And so I think the question becomes like, if he has to play a bunch of Jinx, I mean, he's had good Jinx games in the past, not to take that away from him, but if Jhin is like the number one pick, like, is he a great Jhin player? Is it, you know, the question is TL as a team a Jhin team? Because Umti doesn't want to play, you know, carry jungles a lot of the time. Impact can play carry top lanes. Like, certainly he's a great Rumble player, but he's not the consummate, like, carry top lane player. He is the consummate weak side player. So the onus has to be on APA and Yun to a certain degree to carry this team. And are they really, like, international caliber carry players? Do they have the versatility to do that?
It's year 2 for these guys. So in a sense, like, I mean, we'll find out. I feel like Yon, again, pound for pound, as you highlighted, like MSI EWC was fine. Varus, I think, is still actually going to be playable, especially if it's going to be a lot of Jhin meta, because you can, at least with Varus, like, the poke build got nerfed on this patch, but it still was getting played. I covered the America's Challengers event. Obviously, like, that's tier 2, but so, like, some of the picks in there, like, I assume are just going to be gone, because, like, the best teams will find a way to beat them, but Varus ended up being really high priority by the back half of that tournament. Which I found interesting.
You have more experience on this patch for sure.
Yeah, I just found that interesting because I wasn't expecting that with it being nerfed. Like it was big on 17, but I was surprised that it was as big as it was on 18. It was fearless too, so like that helped. But they were playing it as answers in the Ziggs, which was interesting. So I have a lot of faith in Yon if it ends up being something like Varus Kalista. As you highlighted as Ezreal, like that was his go-to champion from day one. I think his Kais is good. Historically, he wants to play Aphelios in the Jinx rather than a Jinx itself, but I think Aphelios is pretty dead. So I'm interested again. I would actually have a lot of faith if it ends up being any sort of Kalista meta. I think that Yon plays that pick really well, and then freeing up Core. Core's been having a really, really good year. Just having him have an extra tool to be aggressive with. Sure. I think that could be a winning formula for TL, because I agree with you. I think the other interesting thing about that team, we talked about how they played APA and swaps. My diagnosis at TL was that a lot of LCS was Renekton Cassante. And one of the reasons why Impact was our hands down MVP, Impact was sick. I thought top lane competition was down this split. He was also willing to play every single answer into Renekton and Cassante. Like, a lot of teams weren't willing to pull out the Kennen, the Ornn. He was pulling those out earlier on. The GP, yeah. Cassante willing to play the Mordekaiser. He doesn't play the Olaf matchup, which can be good. Doesn't play the Gwen, but that doesn't really fit their team. They want to play fast and be kind of someone that can create space for APA and Yon. And then his Cassante was probably the best. It was the best we had in the league, right? So I thought it was really valuable that he was able to play that circle of champs, like the counters around the two champs to really define the LCS meta. And I do expect the top lane meta to be pretty similar to that. So that could be a real positive. And I'm looking forward to see Impact get tested because like Bwipo really did not show up until playoffs. So Impact was just kind of like beasting everyone this split. And I'm kind of curious to see where he falls in the pool because this was an awesome split for Impact. And I always feel like he just never gets the credit he deserves simply because he plays in NA, even though this guy's been sick for 10 years, right?
What do you read into FlyQuest like glow up because they were clearly the underdog coming into the playoffs and especially the finals, but they actually performed really well. And the way I've always looked at this iteration of the FlyQuest roster is that if you actually can have a day where the side lanes both decide to play well, this is an extremely good team because Inspired has constantly this year just been doing triage for the side lanes. It's like Bwipo fucks up early or Masu Busio fucks up early, and it completely destroys Inspired's early game. He has to go deal with the problem, and sometimes they still win those games, but it has been like a lot of unforced errors from FlyQuest that have made them shaky. And it felt like now that they have a more solid mid laner and quad this split in summer, and you get a playoff run where you actually get to see Busio, not choking basically, and Masu continuing to play well, as well as sure, Bwipo is still inconsistent, but he was a better performer in these playoffs than he has been at other points in the year. Now we have a FlyQuest team that can actually like play through jungle mid and be very good.
Yeah, I'm curious because I feel like when FlyQuest are at their best, obviously consistency in sides, it was an issue. But like for me, it's funny because it was the same thing in spring as it was in summer. I really like when they overload sides in the mid game. I feel like they have a really good read when they go attack a side lane by putting their solo laners there or just having the Kai'Sa follow up, make a play. Ash Arrow
is very important for their run.
Like it's what they're legitimately good at this. I think the best thing for them, Masu is like high key really good on these utility ADs, like for being so early on in his career. I mean, I find it ridiculous. It's this fifth guy split playing competitively, like as a whole. Like the come up this guy's had, like how fast he's ramped up into the player that he can be. Really solid team fighter, always has been. How he's evolved though to like really round out his play. He's getting better at lane. I don't think he's going to be a great laner by any means at this tournament, but I think he'll make up for it in the fights as he really has always done. I feel like this wheelhouse of it, if it ends up being like an Ashe, Jhin, Poke, Varus, Ziggs meta, like that really feels like Masu can play well into that. I'm worried though because I feel like as good as it is for Quad / Solka to have some Syndra Ori in the mid lane. I know Inspire can play anything and everything well, but I feel like him being on a carry was really big for this team at times. He was really willing to play stuff like Brand. I think the Ivern was probably the thing that kind of defined their run the most, but he was playing that to neutralize them. The fact that he could play that and then also go to and have some carry games in a best of series was really big. And I don't think he's going to have that opportunity as much unless he's blowing up early games, right? Because like the champs that I expect to be meta in jungle are just going to fall off and not be as effective later on. So I think that having the Inspired be a carry for this team and having him be the reliable, we're going to be doing the damage later on in the fights was actually pretty big for FlyQuest. And I'm curious to see how they respond to that, like in this tournament, because I feel like that could kind of take away that an element of power from them, just the fact that they do have a jungler that can match like the carries of anyone again this tournament, right? So yeah.
I mean, my concern is just like NA doesn't penalize FlyQuest for having side lane mistakes as hard. I mean, the snowball that some of these Asian teams, like if Bwipo randomly dies in the early game, like the game will be over.
The game's over. Yeah.
So I mean that's my concern is like as good as a player as Inspired is, and as well as Bwipo can kind of bounce back in some scenarios in North America, it really feels like Masu and Busio being young players who can be punished, or Bwipo being overly aggressive, making mistakes. Those snowballs are very, very severe against good Asian teams.
Yeah. The hope for me is that kind of like what we saw with like Fnatic and MSI. I don't think that FlyQuest is going to play similar comps to them, but they're playing stuff like Camille Talia, so you could play the side lanes really fast and like still have windows to make plays even when they were down, and that saved them a few games. I'm wondering if we see something like that from FlyQuest, just kind of commit to, hey, we're going to try and play sides. I think that is the one thing they do really well. And the fact that they at least like to play two sides of them or two lanes of the map and like overload, I feel like can help from playing from behind. But I'm with you in the sense that like they are not the team that like, they're not like TL in the sense that, hey, if we get a lead, we can play the map well enough to win for the next 20 minutes and we're going to put the game away, right? FlyQuest are going to make mistakes, and against the best teams in the world, like, yeah, I mean, they're going to cash that in way more than the NA teams that we had. So yeah, that is a very fair concern. My hope is, as someone that had FlyQuest winning the split at the start of the split, which not many people had, I felt like Masu and Busio could continue to scale, and that Quad fit this team just so much better than Jensen in terms of he's just a better laner.
You would have known, right? Because you cast tier 2. So what was your take on like Quad entering the LCS? Because it seemed like a pretty big, not that Jensen did not play well in spring, right?
Yeah.
But, Quad, he's a kind of unknown Korean player who I know I don't watch tier 2 NA, so I just knew people said he was excelling and like he was dominating in that scene, but you seem to have a lot of confidence in him.
No, he was a beast. I've never heard. I had a couple like funny stories from this. So there were every mid just wanted to play against Quad in the league, right? Because like, oh my god, this guy's got like 80 LCK games, like beat Faker, right? So like, if I can take him down, like I can make it, right? And Quad was owning everyone because that team was 30 in Quad, and like 2/3 of their game in the split, the game was over by like wave 5 because one of those two like had a solo kill or like shaded him to come to the lane, and the game was just over, right? The other thing like about Quad was that I know a big part of him was that he had stage fright, I guess, in like LCK, or like he was always a better scrim player than a stage player. So I know that like FlyQuest just kind of like, hey, you're the best player in this league, go make plays. And frankly, like in the second half of the split, he kind of griefed at times because he was just overplaying his hand. But I do think it actually helped him really build up some confidence in order to perform on a bigger stage, because I've never seen a moment like an LCS outside of the first 2 weeks where like he looked like he was nervous, right? Also his English.
I do think just like in general though, that Western teams are better at unlocking that potential of players, because really I think in Korea or China, if you are not performing on the stage, they just get rid of you and get the next guy coming up, right? Whereas I think, trying to do mental performance coaching is much more of a Western thing than an Eastern thing. So it seems like it might have been a good switch for him potentially.
That's an interesting read actually, with like the fact that the more pressures in there can help. It definitely helped him. I mean, like this is the best I've seen Quad play, right? And like I saw him in the LCK days. I mean, he wasn't really flattering there, but he's actually good here. And we might like, if Nico for whatever reason ends up being blinded, he will play Cassio into it. So that's the hope, you can get the Cassio at Worlds, because Cassio obviously very sick and well renowned across the world. But yeah, no, it was really funny like seeing the players be like, oh my god, this guy's got 80 plus games to LCK. If I can beat him, like I can make it. No one touched this guy. Like for the record, like the best mid we have right now in Challengers League is a Blazolve that like has like any barometer of like where things are at. Like it's not great. We get 2 rookies coming up, like I'm kind of excited about, but need more time. But yeah, like Quad just owned everyone. It was pretty funny.
I feel like the mistake people make when they see these people were like bottom LCK players is they ignore that. Obviously, it's not a 1v1 game. What about their teammates? Like, bro, I think you can even do this for some of the players who are now at the top of the LCK. Like, where the fuck was everyone telling me how good Delight was before he got onto fucking Genji? Where were you all at? Because, by the way, he looks unbelievable these last 2 years. But I'll bet when you have shit teammates, you just don't look as good, do you? Like, because remember, if you're Quad, even if you're like talent-wise as good as the other mid laner, maybe his jungler's like Peanut or Canyon or something, and your jungler is insert a random name, you know what I mean? Like, it's going to make it way harder to be good.
That is a really funny mirror, actually, between the TL and FlyQuest, like the spring and summer split. The fact that, for me, like in spring, FlyQuest was favored to win that final.
Yes.
They beat TL upper bracket 3-2, lost in final 3-1, and then Umti wins like in his first split of LCS after being the journeyman LCK player. Same thing happened for FlyQuest and Quad, right? The 3-2 loss in upper bracket, upset win 3-1, and then Quad gets it. It was kind of actually a fun, mirror that we had in LCS this year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And by the way, I mean, obviously people saw that mad Reddit thread where he like won every game in a US solo queue or whatever. But the other thing is the actual mechanics of Quad look really fucking strong, man. I actually am quite interested to see what he'll do at this World. It's like, think of some of the picks that are going to be available. Some really strong picks out there for mid lane. So he has a chance to win some BO1s over people, surely.
I mean, honestly, I'm really happy for him. Like, I know that like stepping in, like it's hard to learn a new culture. He picked up English really fast. FlyQuest like always said, man, this guy works his ass off. Not all the NACL players are on their they're in their facility. Quad was, and so they were able to kind of be more hands on, and that really paid off. But I think of his career, like when was he ever known for marksman? His smolder was really good. It started drawing bans by the end. He was able to play like all the marksman circles. He was winning both sides of the Triss Corki matchup when that was big. Like, yeah, I mean, like at times he was legit. He was the best mid in playoffs. He was a huge part of the reason that FlyQuest ended up winning. So I'm really hoping he can kind of continue with some of this form. It feels like him and Inspired are pretty in sync. And if it ends up being like really mid jungle defined, then they're not going to topple to like some of the teams, right? I mean, obviously, Canyon Chovy are going to be pretty good against the field, but like I mean, against like the non-tier 1 teams, I do feel like the mid jungle FlyQuest can take it into anyone. So.
Oh, by the way, on the Inspired angle, I'll even throw this out there as well. Normally, everyone will mock players who are like seem delusional and they're overly confident. He's confident though in a way that I've talked to him privately. So it's real. Yeah. Like he isn't just doing it for the camera like Doublelift used to. Like, hey, I could be anyone. Then you could tell like he was fucking pepper sweating if he faced Uzi Eye. Like I actually think, no joke, guys, that Inspired for real actually think there might only be like 3 better junglers in the whole world or something. You know, like I think he'll give it to like Canyon and I think there's a handful he'll give it to. But I actually think maybe he even just says his teammates or whatever. But I think if you put him against those other players, I think he thinks he can beat them. I think if you ask him, can he beat Wei and fucking lose? He say yes, of course, instantly. Give me the fucking teammates. Let me roll. Yeah.
It's interesting because like I've known like APA like for a long time. So like I always knew like when he was coming up, like he talks to keep himself accountable. Like that's something like he does to be like, hey, like if I'm gonna play at this level, like I'm gonna talk, I'm gonna add that extra pressure to myself, and like it's gonna help me perform, right? Whereas Inspired, I feel like he's like a realist, like to help himself. He's like, nah, you know what? Like I may not be better than that guy, but like he's always confident. Like there's never like a time where he talks where he's not confident. Like even when he's like kind of like he's had interviews where like he's pretty critical of like himself and his team. I'm never like, yeah, like that's outlandish. It's like no, like he's kind of right about that. Like that's how the games play it out, and like as long as it's like being handled okay, and it does seem like FlyQuest, for all the flack they got from the community for like whatever their team and environment looks like, it looks pretty good throughout that playoff run, right? I really feel like
I'll also say if you think about how things age, as Gen Alpha says, Cobby, I'll tell you what, arguing a lot with Jensen and Whippo doesn't suddenly seem like that crazy a scenario to find yourself in, does it? Now that we know what they might actually say and think in public. In fact, someone say, a lot of people might argue with someone like Whippo if they were to get into a tete-a-tete, as it were, you know. I don't know, I think that's aged pretty well, mate. Like, if you combine it with how they won the playoffs, Inspired looks fucking amazing right now. His stock is its absolute highest value ever, surely.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy to think too, because I feel like ever since he came in at Rogue, and with how young he's still 22.
Oh yeah,
right? That's crazy, man. Like this guy has the shoulders.
In Europe, and he was only something like 20 at the time when he left. Like he'd already been MVP Worlds every year, and they wrote him off as like he's never going to be good. And he chokes forever. It's mad.
Yeah, I mean, talk about stocks that age well. Him versus Larson too. I mean, that's a funny one as well. But no, I Inspired like to say that his stock's the highest it's ever been. I mean, like for me, I've always rated him really highly. So yeah, I mean, good for Inspired, right?
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.